Picture a humid summer night in the American South, sometime in the mid-19th century. In the shadows, a small group of enslaved men and women slip quietly away from the plantation. They carry no maps, no compass, only the stars above and a fragile hope in their hearts. Along the road, fear presses in from every side. Then, through the stillness, a melody drifts across the night air. Steal away to Jesus. To the overseer, it is just another hymn. But to those trembling ears, it is a message. Tonight, the path to freedom is open. Music, in the world of slavery, was never just entertainment. It was survival. It was a lifeline that tied people to their faith, to each other, and to the possibility of something beyond the whip and the chain. When reading and writing were forbidden, when words spoken aloud could betray a plan, song became a second language hidden on the surface, yet blazing with meaning underneath. The spirituals sounded like prayers, but they doubled as invisible maps. A verse might point toward the North Star. A refrain might advise someone to wade through the river to shake off the dogs. A chorus sung at the right moment might signal that the escape would happen that very night. To those who knew how to listen, music carried secret codes, the difference between capture and survival. This story is not only about oppression, it is also about brilliance and resilience. No set of chains could silence the human spirit. In fact, the songs themselves became keys unseen and unsuspected, unlocking doors to freedom that seemed impossible to open. In the journey ahead, we will move from the cotton fields, where spirituals rose up like prayers, to the hidden signals of the Underground Railroad. We will hear the coded meanings inside familiar songs. Meet Harriet Tubman, the woman who turned music into a technology of liberation, and follow the legacy of these melodies into the modern era. This is not just history. It is the story of how songs carried light through the deepest darkness, and how voices once chained became the sound of freedom itself. From that opening melody in the night, it becomes clear why music was never just a comfort for enslaved people. It was survival. It was a language built out of rhythm and memory, where every verse carried more than it seemed. A hymn sounded like prayer, but underneath, it often held instructions, warnings, or quiet encouragement. The enslaved had been stripped of nearly everything: land, family, freedom, even the right to hold a book. Laws were written to silence them. Reading and writing were forbidden, because words on paper could carry dangerous power. But no law could silence a song. No overseer could chain a tune hummed under breath or shared between tired voices. Spirituals grew out of suffering, yet they carried patterns that made them ideal for secret communication. Call and response created unity, repetition made them memorable, and simple melodies meant anyone could learn them quickly. Even when exhaustion blurred thought, a refrain stayed lodged in memory. These songs became both shields for the spirit and maps for the body. Take the hymn, Steal Away. On the surface, it mourned the struggles of life and longed for heaven's rest. But within its lyrics was another meaning. It was time to gather, time to prepare, time to move toward freedom. What sounded like piety was, in truth, a coded summons whispered in plain sight. This double meaning protected the singers. An overseer, hearing "Steal Away," might nod with approval, thinking faith kept the enslaved obedient. Religion was considered safe, encouraged, even because it supposedly fixed their eyes on the afterlife. But the enslaved turned that expectation upside down. Heaven still meant eternal rest, yes, but it could also mean Canada, Ohio, or the free North. In this way, music became a living disguise. It allowed the enslaved to express both despair and defiance without inviting punishment. The songs carried hope inside a container of faith. To outsiders, they were harmless hymns. To those who knew, they were instructions hidden in harmony, hope carved into melody, a language no master could decode. At night in the quarters, music was conversation. A humming voice on the path could be more than habit. It could be a message, signaling a meeting place or warning of danger. Without a single spoken word, entire plans could be set in motion. Songs traveled faster than whispers and safer than letters. The enslaved knew memory was stronger than ink. A tune could not be confiscated or burned. Unlike scraps of paper, it left no evidence behind. Oral tradition became a living library, with each singer carrying a book inside their chest. Every chorus sung into the night sky was a page in that library of survival. But the power of these songs reached beyond communication. They were also the glue of the soul. Under the sun, bent double in endless rows, music gave rhythm to labor. One voice would call, another would answer, and slowly a chorus would swell. Together, they formed something larger than pain, a reminder they were still human. To an outsider, work songs sounded like weary obedience. To the enslaved, they were a declaration of endurance. The rhythm steadied their pace, but also stitched them together in unity. When voices rose in harmony, it was a subtle rebellion. Even chained, they could still create beauty. In song, they found a strength no whip could break. The words blurred the line between faith and survival. Heaven could mean eternal rest, but it might also mean the northern states. Jordan was not just the biblical river, but the Ohio that divided bondage from freedom. Home could mean the place beyond chains. With every verse, reality and symbol overlapped in hidden layers of meaning. Even those who never risked escape still drew life from these spirituals. A song could carry someone through a night of despair, reminding them they were not alone. Silence bred hopelessness, but music pushed back against hopelessness. A chorus lifted the heart just enough to endure another day, another night, another chance that freedom might come. Frederick Douglass later reflected that the songs of the enslaved spoke truths deeper than any sermon. To him, they expressed both grief and longing with a power words could never match. They were the groans of bondage, but also the whispers of deliverance. Anyone who truly listened could hear both the sorrow of slavery and the seed of freedom. And so the voices rose when the day's toil ended. In the darkness of the quarters, they sang again, sometimes praying, sometimes warning, sometimes both at once. Each melody carried something larger than music: survival, memory, dignity, vision. These were not just songs of sorrow. They were signals of possibility, sparks of light against overwhelming night. From these beginnings, where music itself became a secret language, the story moves into the songs that held even clearer codes. Certain spirituals carried instructions disguised as scripture, lines that could point the way north, direct feet toward water, or remind the desperate to trust in signals carried by the stars. From the moment music became a language, certain songs rose above the rest, carrying messages so precise they became maps in sound. To those who knew how to hear them, they were not only prayers, but directions, not only comfort, but strategy. Every lyric became a step along the hidden path to freedom. One of the most famous is "Follow the Drinking Gourd." On its surface, it seemed like a simple folk song, urging listeners to keep moving, to follow a sign in the heavens. But the Drinking Gourd was no ordinary vessel. It was the Big Dipper constellation, pointing the way to the North Star. For enslaved people with no compass, the sky became a guidebook. At night, when escape parties set out, the North Star told them which way to move. Singing "Follow the Drinking Gourd" reminded them to trust the stars when the earth was uncertain. Each verse planted direction into memory, disguised in innocent rhyme. The lyrics also included references to rivers, hills, and natural markers that mapped real escape routes. Historians debate how exact these instructions were, but for those traveling the Underground Railroad, the song became a chant of orientation. Each repetition of its chorus was a reminder that freedom could be found by reading the heavens. Another song, "Wade in the Water," carried a different kind of wisdom. When enslaved people fled, they were often tracked by dogs trained to follow human scent. To move through rivers or streams could mask their trail. The lyrics urged, "Wade in the water, children," signaling a strategy of survival disguised as a sacred chorus. For those outside the community, it was a baptismal hymn celebrating faith and renewal. But among the enslaved, it was advice whispered in plain sight: move through water to stay hidden. Singing it aloud became both encouragement and instruction, a lifeline when fear pressed close and hounds barked in the distance. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot carried still another meaning. Its soaring chorus pictured a chariot coming down to carry the weary home. To many, it promised heaven's comfort after death. But for those seeking freedom, the chariot was the Underground Railroad itself, the network of safe houses and guides ready to carry them northward. The song's imagery of angels became metaphors for conductors, those brave men and women, both black and white, who risked their lives to guide fugitives. Singing about a band of angels coming after me reassured escapees that help was near. What sounded like a plea for salvation was, in fact, a coded promise of earthly deliverance. Perhaps the most thunderous of them all was "Go down, Moses." Its refrain, "Let my people go," echoed through cabins and fields with unmistakable power. To the enslaved, Pharaoh was the master, Egypt was the plantation, and Moses was anyone bold enough to lead others out of bondage. The biblical story became their own, sung into existence. Harriet Tubman herself favored this song. When she prepared to guide others north, she sometimes sang "Go Down, Moses" loudly, signaling that the journey was about to begin. At other times, she sang it slow and mournful, warning people to wait because danger was close. The same melody became a shifting code, alive with meaning. This flexibility was part of what made these songs unbreakable. They could not be reduced to one fixed translation. Depending on how they were sung, fast or slow, soft or strong, the same words could signal urgency, caution, or celebration. The code lived not only in the lyrics, but also in tone, rhythm, and timing. Every plantation had its own variations, and meanings spread by word of mouth. What was known in one community might not be clear in another, protecting the network from betrayal. The songs were both universal and local, shifting to fit the needs of those who sang them. This made them nearly impossible to decode from outside. The beauty of this system was its invisibility. To outsiders, these were harmless hymns, echoing Bible stories that even masters approved. Religion cloaked resistance in a garment of piety. Overseers who forbade talk of escape often encouraged singing, thinking it soothed unrest. Little did they realize that the very songs they allowed carried rebellion's flame. In the fields, under the hot sun, a group might sing, "Wade in the water." To a master, it was a simple chant, a way to lighten work. But for those who knew, it was rehearsal, teaching the body and the ear to remember what to do when the time came. Singing was practice for freedom. At night, around the quarters, voices rose in "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." Children heard it as comfort, elders heard it as faith, but those preparing to flee heard it as reassurance. Help is near, the chariot is coming, the journey is possible. The song became a bridge between generations, carrying layered meanings for every listener. The genius of these songs was that they never surrendered their religious truth. They truly were prayers, sung from broken hearts to a God who seemed distant yet near. But at the same time, they were tools, reshaped into strategy by a people who refused to believe freedom was only for the afterlife. This double edge gave them durability. Even today, when choirs sing, "Go Down, Moses" or "Steal Away," the weight of history trembles in every note. What we hear as tradition was once revolution. Each lyric held the chance to save lives, to turn despair into motion, to turn chains into pathways. Songs like these remind us that survival often requires creativity. Denied the pen, the enslaved used melody. Denied the right to gather freely, they met in song. Denied freedom itself, they imagined it, rehearsed it, and coded it in their music until the dream became reality. What began as sound became the architecture of escape. From these coded hymns, the story shifts toward the people who wielded them most effectively. Among them was Harriet Tubman, a woman whose courage and brilliance made her name a legend. She transformed spirituals from hidden maps into active signals, conducting lives to freedom with nothing more than her voice and her unwavering resolve. Harriet Tubman was born into chains, yet she refused to let those chains define her. After escaping slavery herself, she returned again and again to guide others to freedom. She carried no weapons of war, no maps of land, yet she carried something far stronger, an unbreakable will and the power of song. People called her Moses, and for good reason. Just as the biblical Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, Harriet led enslaved men, women, and children out of the plantations of the South. She relied on courage, secrecy, and faith, but also on music. Songs became her signals, her living codes, her way of directing movement. When Tubman prepared a group to leave, she sometimes sang, "Go down, Moses," in a strong, triumphant voice. To anyone listening from outside, it was a hymn full of longing for biblical deliverance. But to those gathered, it was a rallying cry. Tonight the Red Sea will part, and Pharaoh will no longer rule us. Other times, when danger lurked too close, her tone shifted. The same song might be sung slower, quieter, mournful. Those listening would know to wait, to stay hidden until the path cleared. The difference lay not in the words, but in the way she carried them. Melody became command. Rhythm became instruction. Tubman turned her voice into a conductor's baton. Where others might whisper, she sang. Where others might hide messages in scraps of paper, she placed them in melodies that blended with the night air. No overseer could accuse her of rebellion for singing a hymn, yet those who heard her understood every hidden note. Her gift was not just bravery, but creativity. Tubman understood that freedom required more than courage. It required intelligence, imagination, and the ability to outwit systems built to crush the human spirit. She recognized music as more than devotion. She saw it as a technology of liberation, a code hidden in plain sight. This made her more than a leader of escapes. She became a living symbol. To the enslaved, she proved that the impossible was possible. To the free, she embodied the truth that courage takes many forms. Sometimes a shouted command, sometimes a whispered prayer, sometimes a song rising steady against the silence of fear. Tubman's work through the Underground Railroad has been described countless times as miraculous. She led dozens, perhaps hundreds, to freedom, never once losing a passenger. But the miracle lay not only in her courage to risk capture. It lay in her use of every resource, from stars in the sky to the power of a hymn. Think of the scene. A group of weary escapees huddled in the woods, terrified of discovery. In the distance, a voice rises, "Let my people go." The words echo through the trees, heavy with meaning. To some, it is worship. To those waiting, it is direction, permission, assurance that the journey will continue tonight. In these moments, Tubman was not simply a guide. She was like a conductor leading a secret orchestra, every note a signal, every rhythm a step forward. Her bravery turned the music of suffering into music of strategy. She turned the very songs meant to pacify into instruments of resistance and escape. Her reliance on music also spoke to the trust she placed in her people. She knew they understood the codes, the tones, the hidden meanings. The community's shared knowledge of spirituals allowed her to communicate without words. This trust forged unity, binding together strangers into companions on a dangerous road to freedom. Some historians argue that Tubman's genius lay in her ability to merge the spiritual with the tactical. She never abandoned faith. Songs were always prayers, but she also never ignored reality. Songs were also maps, warnings, or calls to action. She balanced heaven and earth, showing her people that God's promise could take form in their footsteps. This balance made her both a myth and a human being. Stories of her visions, her reliance on dreams, and her unshakable courage gave her a larger-than-life aura. Yet the truth is just as powerful. A woman with no formal education, no wealth, no official power, used memory, faith, and music to rewrite history. Her life reminds us that music has always been more than entertainment. In her hands, it became a shield, a sword, a lantern in the night. Every note was a declaration that the human spirit cannot be silenced. She proved that sometimes the most radical tool of resistance is the simple act of singing. Through Tubman, the spirituals moved beyond hidden codes into active commands. They were no longer just songs of hope sung in the fields, but urgent messages guiding footsteps through forests and rivers. She transformed tradition into innovation, keeping her people safe while outsmarting those who sought to drag them back into bondage. Her story flows naturally into the wider network that made her work possible. The Underground Railroad was not rails and trains, but homes and hearts, signals and songs. It was a secret system powered by courage and trust, and music was the invisible thread that tied it together, weaving paths toward freedom in the dead of night. The Underground Railroad has often been pictured as iron tracks and locomotives, but in truth, it was something far more human. It was a network of secret routes, safe houses, and brave souls willing to risk everything. At its heart was trust, and one of the strongest bonds of that trust was music itself. The name Railroad was symbolic. Conductors were guides like Harriet Tubman. Stations were safe homes hidden along the way. Passengers were the men and women fleeing bondage. Every journey required silence, secrecy, and coordination. Yet, within this silence, songs could still move, threading signals between people without drawing suspicion from the outside world. Imagine a field where enslaved people labored under the sun. Overseers walked nearby, ears dull to the meaning of the music. A group began singing, "Wade in the Water." To the master, it was just another hymn. To those planning escape, it was rehearsal, a reminder of the path. Move through rivers, erase the dog's scent. The beauty of music was its disguise. No one could forbid singing. In fact, overseers often encouraged it, thinking it kept spirits calm or labor steady. They failed to see that what seemed like compliance was rebellion in disguise. The very hymns they permitted were the ones planting direction, courage, and solidarity in weary hearts. At night, when groups gathered in secret, songs connected them across distance. Someone might sing softly from a cabin porch, a sound carried by the wind. Those listening knew what it meant: safety ahead, danger nearby, or a call to gather at the appointed time. The songs were invisible lanterns, shining without light. The Underground Railroad depended on communication that could not be written or spoken openly. Music filled that gap. The spirituals were both shield and sword, harmless to the untrained ear yet powerful to those who understood. This dual nature made them indispensable. They created a code impossible for masters to break and essential for survival. Communities in the North also joined this chorus. Black churches in free states used spirituals to keep memory alive, teaching songs to children so the codes would never fade. Safe houses sometimes greeted travelers with familiar hymns, a sign of welcome and belonging. The railroad stretched across state lines, stitched together with melody. In some cases, even sympathetic white allies learned to listen for the meanings within spirituals. They recognized when a group singing "Steal Away" carried urgency. They understood that "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" hinted at new arrivals needing help. The music created a shared language, broadening trust between those who sought freedom and those who aided it. These songs gave courage to those still waiting. Even if they never set foot on the railroad, enslaved people could hear "Go Down, Moses" and feel hope stir. They could imagine Pharaoh's defeat, imagine chains breaking. Music kept the dream alive until the moment came to act. It was preparation for freedom's long journey. Every successful escape carried with it the echo of song. Some groups hummed quietly as they walked at night, the rhythm steadying their pace, the lyrics reminding them of the path. Others sang in their minds, holding verses like talismans. The songs gave direction, but they also gave strength when fear pressed close. The Underground Railroad was more than a system of hiding places. It was a culture of resistance. Music was the heartbeat of that culture, uniting scattered individuals into one people with a common goal. Every hymn was another tie in the invisible web stretching northward, holding the promise that freedom was not impossible. We often picture escape as physical, the body moving through swamps, forests, rivers. But it was also spiritual. Music lifted minds beyond fear, carrying them into visions of liberation. Songs created inner freedom long before the outer journey began. By the time footsteps struck the road, the spirit had already walked northward in melody. This is why so many accounts describe singing as inseparable from survival. Without the songs, despair might have crushed resolve. With them, even the most dangerous trek became bearable. Music gave shape to the railroad, made its signals clearer, made its dangers less paralyzing. It was both compass and companion, both code and comfort. In this way, the Underground Railroad shows us that resistance was never only about secret paths and hidden rooms. It was about imagination, the ability to use the simplest tools, like voice and rhythm, to carve out space for freedom. The songs were inventions of necessity, as ingenious as any weapon, as crucial as any map. From the railroad's hidden roots, the story flows deeper into the spirituals themselves. These were not only codes or signals, but also the fusion of faith and rebellion. They blended prayer with protest, creating hymns that spoke of heaven yet pointed toward freedom on earth. In their verses lay both devotion and defiance. The spirituals were more than songs. They were the soul of a people bound in chains yet dreaming of freedom. Rooted in Christianity but shaped by African rhythms and traditions, they formed a music unlike any other. These songs were both prayers to God and whispers of resistance, blending heaven and earth in every note. In the stories of Scripture, enslaved people found their own reflections. Egypt became the South, Pharaoh the master, Canaan the land of freedom, and the Jordan River, a boundary between slavery and deliverance. Spirituals carried these symbols into everyday life. Singing them aloud was both worship and rebellion, affirming that God's promise included freedom here and now. Take the symbol of Canaan. In the Bible, it was the promised land flowing with milk and honey. For those in bondage, Canaan meant the north, the land beyond chains. Singing of crossing into Canaan meant envisioning escape, tasting freedom through imagination first. The metaphor allowed hope to bloom even in the harshest fields. The Jordan River held similar double meanings. In Scripture, it marked the threshold into the promised land. For the enslaved, the Ohio River served as their Jordan, the dividing line between bondage and liberty. Singing about crossing Jordan was not only longing for heaven, it was preparing for the day when feet would cross real waters. This blending of faith and resistance created songs with layered power. They encouraged endurance by promising eternal rest, yet they also encouraged action by pointing toward earthly liberation. The same words carried both visions. A master might hear submission, the enslaved heard strategy. The double voice of the spirituals kept hope alive while disguising its radical intent. Religion itself was a paradox within slavery. Some masters used Christianity to justify oppression, twisting Scripture to preach obedience. Yet the enslaved reshaped that faith into a wellspring of strength. In their hands, hymns became weapons of defiance. They clung to a God who sided with the oppressed, who heard their cries, who promised deliverance. This faith was not passive. It demanded courage. Singing, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," was not only longing for heaven's embrace, but also daring to believe that freedom could be seized here. Singing, "Steal Away," was not resignation. It was the quiet declaration that chains would not last forever, that one day the soul and body would rise. In the fields, spirituals soothed the weary and bound communities together. In secret gatherings, they became the script of escape. Around the fire or in the hush of night, voices joined in harmony, weaving together both sorrow and resolve. The music turned grief into strength, despair into determination, and faith into a map pointing north. Children learned these songs almost as lullabies. Elders passed them down like sacred knowledge. The lyrics and rhythms became part of collective memory, ensuring that even when families were torn apart, the code lived on. The songs became inheritance treasures, carried not in hands or pockets, but in voices and hearts. Even for those who never fled, the spirituals mattered deeply. They turned everyday worship into quiet defiance. Singing in the quarters was a reminder that dignity remained, that no master could own the human spirit. The songs were survival for the soul, reminding each person that they were still human, still God's children, still free within. The emotional weight of these songs cannot be overstated. They carried grief, but they also carried defiance. They lamented suffering, yet celebrated the dream of deliverance. They embodied both the cross and the resurrection, both the whip and the breaking of chains. Within every verse lived the complexity of hope forged in fire. Over time, these spirituals became the cultural backbone of the Black community. They shaped the rise of gospel music, blues, and jazz. They carried rhythms across generations, reminding each new voice of the resilience born in fields and cabins. They proved that even the deepest oppression could not extinguish the power of song. The genius of the spirituals lay in their ability to exist in two worlds at once. They belonged to the sacred and the practical, the eternal and the immediate. They spoke to God while speaking to one another. They lifted eyes toward heaven while pointing feet toward freedom. They were hymns, but also maps, shields, and declarations. From these spirituals emerged not only coded instructions, but also real stories of escape. The songs were more than symbolic, they worked. People listened, remembered, acted, and survived because of them. To understand their full power, we must hear the testimonies of those who used them in practice, shaping stories of liberation that echoed through generations. The power of these songs was not only symbolic, it was lived. Generations later, stories were told of people who escaped using music as their compass. They remembered verses passed down by elders, repeated in whispers and sung in fields, then turned those words into maps under the stars. The songs became tools of survival. One of the most enduring tales centers on "Follow the Drinking Gourd." The lyrics pointed to the Big Dipper and the North Star, guiding travelers through the night. Families recalled how ancestors set out with nothing but this song in memory. Each refrain was a reminder. As long as the star remained, freedom had direction. The journey north was never simple. Rivers had to be crossed, swamps trudged through, forests navigated in silence. Yet the song gave orientation, linking heaven with earth. One verse mentioned rivers meeting real markers on the land. What might sound like simple poetry became a living map, whispered by parents to children before the journey began. Another remembered song was "Wade in the Water." Testimonies describe groups who used it as practical advice. Dogs would lose the scent in running water, so escapees sought rivers and creeks. Singing about wading was both a way of rehearsing and a way of calming nerves. The words carried strategy disguised as devotion. Picture a family creeping toward freedom at night. They reach a stream, fear pressing close. Someone recalls the song, its rhythm steady. Wade in the water, children. The words guide them into the stream, where the current erases their trail. The melody echoes in memory, turning fear into courage with every step through the cold water. Other stories speak of "Swing Low," "Sweet Chariot." Children remembered their elders singing it softly, assuring them that a chariot was near. For some, the chariot meant the Underground Railroad's helpers waiting in the woods. The song gave courage to move forward, promising that angels conductors in disguise were coming to carry them closer to freedom. The line, "Coming for to carry me home," could mean heaven, but for many it meant safe passage north. Families told of nights when hearing that chorus, whispered by a neighbor, was the sign to prepare. A simple hymn became a call to action, weaving generations into a chain of resistance. "Go Down, Moses" carried particular weight. Survivors of slavery later recalled how its thunderous demand, "Let my people go," was both prayer and protest. Harriet Tubman used it as a signal, shifting tone to convey meaning. Groups knew from her singing whether to move or stay. The power of a song kept them alive. Accounts from the era describe how voices carried through night air like beacons. One man remembered his grandmother teaching him to listen carefully. A fast rhythm might mean urgency, while a drawn-out, mournful tune meant delay. These subtle shifts in tone created a code more flexible than words, a language impossible to capture on paper. In oral histories collected after emancipation, elders told how songs bound communities together even when families were sold apart. One woman remembered learning "Steal Away" from her mother before being separated. Years later, hearing it sung in another place, she knew its meaning immediately. The code transcended distance, connecting strangers through shared memory. These testimonies reveal something profound. The songs were not accidents. They were deliberately crafted, remembered, and used as lifelines. They taught children how to imagine freedom, how to read signs in nature, how to move safely when the chance arrived. Music became an inheritance of survival, carried across generations like sacred fire. Some stories sound almost miraculous. A group traveling by night reached a dangerous crossing. Unsure which way to turn, they heard a voice in the distance, singing, "Swing low, sweet chariot." They followed the sound, which led them to a hidden safe house. The song became a lantern, guiding them to shelter without a single spoken word. Others remembered songs as warnings. An elder might sing "Steal Away" slowly when patrols were near, telling the community to stay put. The same song, sung strong and joyful, might mean the path was open. The code lived in delivery as much as in lyrics, making every voice an instrument of communication. Scholars later noted how this system resembled Morse code, yet far more organic. It was a cultural Morse, shaped by memory and faith, designed to be fluid and adaptable. Nothing was written down, nothing left behind, yet everyone in the community knew how to listen. In this way, music became an unbreakable chain of knowledge. For those who survived, the songs remained part of their deepest memories. After emancipation, when interviewed, many spoke with tears about how hymns had carried them through. One man said that every step northward was accompanied by music in his head. Without it, despair might have swallowed him. With it, he found courage. The oral tradition also carried the voices of ancestors. Singing was a way of remembering those lost children, mothers, fathers, sold away. When a group sang, "Wade in the water," they sang not only for themselves but for those who could not be there. The songs preserved community across distance, binding the living to the absent. Even today, when these spirituals are sung in choirs, their echoes carry that history. The polished harmonies of modern performances trace back to raw voices in fields and forests, where melody was survival. Behind every note lives a story of someone wading through rivers, someone following stars, someone whispering courage into their children's ears. These stories show us that the spirituals were not abstract. They were lived realities, lifelines passed from mouth to ear. They were songs of strategy, memory, and resistance. They proved that even without literacy, without weapons, without freedom, people could still create a system of communication strong enough to defy the impossible. From these testimonies of lived escape, the story broadens once more. The spirituals did not vanish after freedom was won. They lived on, shaping culture and faith, becoming the seed of new musical traditions. Their legacy spread beyond slavery, beyond the South, into movements of justice across the world, where songs again carried courage into the night. The end of slavery did not silence these songs. Instead, they transformed, carrying their legacy into a new world. Spirituals became a foundation for Black culture in America, passed down through churches, schools, and families. What once guided footsteps northward now shaped the sound of worship, becoming the backbone of gospel and later inspiring blues and jazz. Black colleges preserved these melodies, teaching choirs to sing them with reverence. Groups like the Fisk Jubilee Singers brought spirituals onto national stages in the late 19th century. stunning audiences with their depth. What began in hidden quarters under bondage rose into concert halls, revealing to the world that these songs were not primitive chants, but masterpieces of resilience. In the 20th century, the legacy deepened during the civil rights movement. Marchers in Montgomery and Selma sang the same melodies their enslaved ancestors had sung. "We Shall Overcome" became the anthem, but behind it lived the older hymns, "Go Down, Moses," "Swing Low," "Sweet Chariot," the same voices that once defied masters, now defied segregation and injustice. Martin Luther King Jr. often drew on these spirituals in his sermons. He spoke of the promised land, echoing the biblical language that had carried slaves through despair. At rallies, choirs lifted "This Little Light of Mine" and "Wade in the Water," reminding people that faith and resistance were inseparable, that freedom was both spiritual and political. The power of these songs also reached far beyond America. In Africa, liberation movements against colonial rule echoed the same principle: music as a weapon of unity and defiance. Freedom songs in South Africa during apartheid carried rhythms reminiscent of spirituals, binding communities in courage. Across oceans, the same truth held: music could dismantle fear. In Latin America, protest singers wove resistance into folk traditions, creating music that challenged dictatorships. Just as enslaved Africans had hidden messages in hymns, activists in Chile, Argentina, and Brazil encoded protest in ballads. The parallel is striking. Oppressed peoples across history found in music the one tool their oppressors could never fully control. This global connection reminds us that spirituals were not only African-American heritage, they were part of a universal story of survival. Whenever human beings have faced tyranny, music has carried their voices. From cotton fields to marches for civil rights, from apartheid townships to plazas in South America, songs have carried the courage to resist. The endurance of these songs also lies in their adaptability. They began as field cries, became coded hymns, then rose into polished concert pieces, and finally re-emerged as rallying anthems. Each generation reshaped them, but the core remained the same: faith, resistance, and the belief that freedom could be sung into existence. Today, choirs around the world sing "Steal Away" or "Go Down, Moses" with reverence, often without realizing the layers of history beneath the notes. Audiences hear the sorrow, but those who know the story also hear strategy, bravery, and a network of hidden signals. The songs carry history even when history books remain silent. Every time these hymns are performed, they remind us of the creativity that sustained survival. They show that oppressed people are never voiceless. They find ways to speak even in silence. The enslaved turned hymns into weapons of hope. Civil rights activists turned them into marching songs. Communities worldwide still turn to music for strength today. In this way, the spirituals became more than historical relics. They became living traditions, teaching each generation that freedom requires not only action, but imagination. They whisper to us that the human spirit cannot be silenced, that even in the darkest night, voices can rise, carrying light through melody. The songs endure because the struggle continues. From this legacy, we return to the deeper truth. Music is not decoration, not mere entertainment. It is survival, memory, and power. It holds stories that words cannot capture, strategies that paper cannot record. The spirituals prove that the simplest of tools, a human voice, a shared melody, can alter history and open doors once thought locked forever. The journey of these songs does not end with history's victories. They call to us still, reminding us that oppression has not vanished, that freedom always needs voices to carry it forward. Every time the old spirituals rise again, they ask us, what chains must still be broken, and who will carry the song today? And so the story of the spirituals is not finished. It is carried in choirs, in protests, in whispered prayers, in the memory of those who once risked everything to follow the stars. They remain a testament that the human voice, raised in faith and defiance, can still lead us toward a promised land. These songs began in bondage, but they did not end there. They were born out of chains, yet they rose above chains, carrying people through swamps and forests, over rivers and borders. They gave voice to those who had no right to speak. They gave courage to those who had no reason to hope. Every note was survival. Every refrain was resistance. Without these songs, countless journeys north might have failed. Music was not decoration, it was strategy. It was the difference between despair and determination, between being hunted down and moving forward another mile. The enslaved discovered that melody could be a map, harmony could be a shield. What makes their story so extraordinary is that the oppressors never understood. Masters encouraged singing, believing it softened hearts and kept people compliant. They thought the hymns turned eyes toward heaven, away from freedom on earth. But they were blind to the truth. The very songs they permitted were the ones carrying rebellion in every line. This was the genius of the spirituals. They carried two voices at once. One voice prayed, asking for God's deliverance in eternity. The other whispered, pointing to rivers, stars, and chariots, ready to carry the weary northward. The enslaved lived in both worlds at once, and their music kept both visions alive. Even after freedom was won, the songs did not fade. They became gospel, blues, and jazz. They became anthems for marches, sermons for pulpits, lessons for choirs. They were sung by students, by preachers, by crowds demanding justice. They lived on because the struggle lived on, and each new fight for freedom needed the old music. These songs remind us of something profound. Oppression cannot silence imagination. You can chain a body, but you cannot chain a song. You can forbid books, but you cannot forbid memory. You can scatter families, but you cannot scatter the melodies that bind them. The spirituals endured because they lived in the one place no master could reach. And today, when we hear them sung, we are not only listening to music, we are listening to testimony. We are hearing the voices of ancestors who risked everything, who turned their sorrow into strategy, who turned their prayers into pathways. Each verse still carries the weight of survival, the dignity of defiance. The story of these songs is also the story of light in darkness. They were lanterns no overseer could extinguish, torches carried across rivers and forests. They were whispers louder than chains, promises stronger than fear. They remind us that freedom has always been fragile, but it has always been sung into existence by those who needed it most. And so, we are left with a question: what songs are still waiting to be sung today? Whose voices must still rise to carry courage through the night? The legacy of the spirituals is not a closed chapter, but an open invitation to find our own ways of singing truth into the world, no matter the risk. Because the lesson is clear: music is not only art, it is life. It is the secret code of survival. It is the invisible map that leads people out of despair. It is the chorus that binds strangers into companions. It is the sound of hope when hope seems impossible. It is, and always has been, the language of freedom.